1 dose versus 3 doses of benzathine penicillin G in early syphilis, NCT 367660, NEJM 2025. Sep 5th Executive Summary. The long-standing standard for early syphilis treatment, 3 weekly intramuscular injections of 2.4 million units of benzathine penicillin G, BPG, has now been directly tested against a simplified single-dose regimen. The Phase 4 randomized multicenter trial, NCT 03636760, conducted in the United States with 249 participants, demonstrated non-inferiority of 1 dose versus 3 doses. At 6 months, serologic response rates were 76% in the single-dose group and 70% in the 3-dose group. No clinical relapses were observed, and adverse effects were comparable. This result has profound implications for clinical practice, public health logistics, and global supply chains, particularly given recurrent penicillin shortages. By validating that additional doses do not confer measurable benefit, the study challenges a decades-old convention and opens the door for policy realignment in syphilis control programs. BBIU Technical Report, Syphilis and Penicillin, the Spiral Pathogen and the Timeless Cure. Introduction: the bacterium behind the disease. Syphilis is caused by Treponema pallidum, subsp. pallidum, a bacterium with a unique shape and behavior. It is a spirochete, a thin spiral-shaped organism that moves like a corkscrew using internal periplasmic flagella. This motion allows it to penetrate tissues, cross membranes, and even reach the fetus through the placenta. Unlike other sexually transmitted pathogens, such as Neisseria gonorrhea, or Chlamydia trachomatis, chlamydia, T. pallidum is almost invisible. It does not stain with Gram, requires dark-field microscopy or special immunofluorescence, and presents few surface antigens. This stealth biology explains why it can persist silently in the human host for decades. Syphilis and other sexually transmitted infections, STIs. Biologically, syphilis is distinct from gonorrhea, chlamydia, or HIV, but epidemiologically, it overlaps with them. Co-infections are common, especially syphilis HIV, since syphilitic ulcers provide a direct entry point for HIV. Transmission networks often overlap, particularly among high-risk groups. Symbolically, gonorrhea and chlamydia are visible infections, pain, discharge, while syphilis is the silent infiltrator. It advances quietly, only to resurface with devastating effects decades later. Together, STIs form a structural package. Some act as acute shocks, others as long-term infiltrations, and syphilis is the one that ties them together by silently amplifying the impact of the rest. The 4 phases of syphilis. Primary syphilis appears 2 to 3 weeks after infection as a single painless ulcer, chancre, often ignored because it does not hurt. Symbolically, the unheeded early warning signal. Secondary syphilis, weeks to months later, diffuse rash, including palms and soles, mucocutaneous lesions, condyloma lata, lymph node enlargement. The infection becomes systemic and visible. Symbolically, the crisis phase, when hidden risk becomes undeniable. Latent syphilis, serologically positive but clinically silent. Early latent, within 1 year, is still transmissible. Late latent is not. Symbolically, the hidden debt, apparently gone but structurally persistent. Tertiary syphilis, 10 to 30 years later, gummas, granulomatous lesions, cardiovascular syphilis, aortic aneurysm, and neurosyphilis, dementia, tabes dorsalis. Symbolically, the collapse of systems after decades of neglect. Histopathology, the vascular signature. The hallmark of tertiary syphilis is endarteritis obliterans, chronic inflammation with plasma cells around small and medium arteries, intimal thickening that narrows and eventually closes the lumen. In the aorta, destruction of the vasa vasorum, aneurysm. In the CNS, ischemia and degeneration, neurosyphilis. This vascular pathology reflects a structural metaphor: flow channels, blood vessels, or systems of finance and governance, progressively narrowed by invisible infiltration until collapse. Why penicillin works and still works. Penicillin, discovered in 1928 and clinically deployed in the 1940s, remains the definitive cure for syphilis. It blocks bacterial cell wall synthesis by inhibiting penicillin-binding proteins. T. pallidum has a fragile, minimal peptidoglycan wall and has never developed stable resistance mechanisms. Unlike other pathogens, it lacks beta-lactamases and has limited genetic plasticity. This makes syphilis unique. For 80 years, a single antibiotic has remained fully effective. In an era of antibiotic resistance, this is almost unprecedented. Types of penicillins, brief overview. Natural, penicillin G, IV, penicillin V, oral. Resistant to penicillinase, oxacillin, dicloxacillin. Aminopenicillins, ampicillin, amoxicillin, broader gram-negative coverage. Anti-pseudomonal, piperacillin, ticarcillin. Depot forms, benzathine and procaine penicillin, slow release. Combinations with beta-lactamase inhibitors, amoxicillin clavulinate, piperacillin tazobactam. For syphilis, benzathine penicillin G is the drug of choice. The NEJM 2025 trial, 1 dose versus 3. The Phase 4 trial, NCT 363766U, NEJM SEP 2025, directly compared 1 dose, 2.4 million units benzathine penicillin GIM once. 3 doses, 2.4 million units IM for 3 weeks, total 7.2 mem. Results: serologic response at 6 months, 76%, 1 dose versus 70%, 3 doses. No clinical relapses in either arm. Adverse effects more frequent in the 3-dose group: pain, injection reactions. Conclusion: a single dose is non-inferior to 3. The principle of effective range. The key concept: doses above the effective range do not improve efficacy, they only increase adverse effects. 1 dose already maintains serum levels above the MIC of T. pallidum for weeks. Additional doses only add to the AUC, area under the curve, but provide no extra killing. Instead, they increase risk: pain, hypersensitivity, anaphylaxis, and resource waste. This principle applies not only to antibiotics but to policy and economics. After sufficiency, redundancy becomes liability. Adverse effects of penicillin: local, injection pain, induration. Immune, rash, urticaria, anaphylaxis, rare but life-threatening. Jarisch-Herxheimer reaction, fever and malaise within 24 hours after treatment of spirochetal infections due to bacterial lysis, not allergy. Rare severe events: Stevens-Johnson syndrome, nephritis, hematologic effects. BBIU opinion: syphilis is not only a medical condition but a structural metaphor. A stealth pathogen that infiltrates quietly, resurfaces with systemic manifestations, and collapses critical functions if ignored. The NEJM 2025 trial proves that simplicity is superior to redundancy. 1 sufficient strike, a single 2.4 mg dose of benzathine penicillin G, achieves the same outcome as 3 redundant interventions. Once the therapeutic threshold is reached, more dosing only multiplies risk, pain, and resource waste. The epidemiological picture in South Korea amplifies the urgency of this lesson. As reported by BBIU, nearly 2,800 confirmed syphilis cases in 2024 were concentrated among young men aged 20 to 39, with early latent syphilis dominating the case profile. This concentration highlights not only a clinical challenge but a structural vulnerability. Infection clusters in the most economically and socially active demographic can destabilize broader systems of productivity and social trust. BBIU syphilis cases in South Korea. From a symbolic perspective, this pairing, the spiral pathogen and the timeless cure, reveals a broader law. Efficiency prevails over accumulation. Visibility must be restored to the invisible infiltrator. Global policy should align with biological truth rather than medical inertia. Thus, syphilis and penicillin together embody the principle of structural sufficiency. When clarity is applied with precision, systemic threats can be neutralized without excess.
Welcome to the BioPharma Business Intelligence Unit, where symbolic integrity meets strategic clarity. At BBIU, we go beyond the headlines to decode the structural forces behind global biopharma, AI, and economic realignment. If you value precision, verification, and symbolic depth, this channel is for you. Subscribe now to access our weekly briefings, dossiers, and intelligence reports, and consider joining our institutional tier to unlock early warning systems, custom metrics, and exclusive strategic insight. You're not just listening, you're entering the future of epistemic intelligence. www.biopharmabusinessintelligenceunit.com